This video is a celebration of reaching the 76 subscriber mark on YouTube and is dedicated to all of my wonderful viewers. When one thinks of West Virginia, you imagine pristine hills that are populated by backwoods folks who tell crazy stories about mythical creatures, or the vast mines burrowed into the sides of mountains to extract resources, and small farming communities that dot the rural landscape, which is accurate, somewhat, within the world of Fallout 76. But what we experience in-game is also quite different, as the map encompasses an area that is roughly from Harper's Ferry in the east to Point Pleasant in the west, with many different towns, attractions, and landscapes squeezed within. However, before we get too far into this video, I want you to leave a like, comment, and subscribe if you enjoy. Every little bit of feedback helps me greatly. The area in which you first emerge into is known simply as the forest, and is, as expected, a forest filled with lush foliage, like towering trees and dense undergrowth that teem with life, all growing on the rolling Appalachian mountains that seem to stretch on for infinity, that is only broken by occasional signs of former human inhabitation, roads, and rivers that flow through deep valleys. This is the closest thing to pristine wilderness you can have in the post-war world, where despite the rampant mutations that plague every surviving creature here, it appears the ecosystem is healthy and has nearly recovered fully. Notable locations include Vault 76, which was a control vault located on the northern fringes of the forest and serves as the home vault of the pioneers. This vault was marketed as a celebration of America's tricentennial anniversary and dedicated on July 4th, 2076 to house the best and brightest America had to offer, and a national broadcast to war-weary nation as a sign of hope and salvation in a world of high tensions. The vault closed like all others on October 23rd, 2077 when the Great War kicked off, sealing its 500 occupants away for 25 years exactly, only reopening on October 23rd, 2102 and what has been dubbed Reclamation Day to a brave new world, where the vault residents were supposed to rebuild America from the ashes. Down the metaphorical road is West Virginia's capital, Charleston, the former seat of power for the state and post-war Charleston emergency government. The city was a large and bustling metropolis that would be spared the immediate horrors of the Great War, as no nuclear weapons were aimed here or missed outright, allowing the citizens here to quickly form an emergency government, which was headed by the state Speaker of the House, Abigail Poole, in the absence of the state's governor, who had disappeared after his political corruption had been exposed just prior to the bombs dropping. The Charleston emergency government would attempt to reestablish order in the area and assist survivors, which was headed by a provisional council formed from what remained of the state government until elections could be held. They quickly sent scouts out across Appalachia to make contact with and attempt to form relationships with other groups. This worked somewhat with the Brotherhood of Steel, where the two organizations cooperated and shared some resources, but didn't work at all with the raiders, but a mutually beneficial relationship was formed with the responders. This was a volunteer disaster relief organization that was originally composed of first responders, policemen, medical personnel, etc., to assist communities and provide survival assistance in the immediate post-war world. The group organized basic survival courses to teach local communities west of the Appalachian Mountains, but as these towns became more self-sufficient, this group's focus would turn to more long-term thinking, specifically restarting the economy around the cap to ease trading between settlements by constructing automated trading stations at every railroad station and the White Springs Resort. The responders' headquarters was located at the Morgantown Airport, which they converted into a sprawling fortified complex to house many of their members and operations. But the group also had a very strong presence in Charleston to communicate and work with the Charleston emergency government. However, early on Christmas morning, 2082, the Cutthroat Raider gang, led by David Thorpe, destroyed the Summersville Dam with mini nuke in retribution for his wife Rosalind's presumed death after a raid, causing a devastating flood that destroyed the city and killed hundreds in the process and wiped out the emergency government. This left Charleston in ruins, and the responders noticeably weaker, as this was one of their main supply points and housed much of their membership. However, the Fire Breather Division realized the devastated urban environment made a perfect training ground for recruits looking to become a part of their elite unit. Point Pleasant was a small town on the bank of the Ohio River that is known for the Mothman Museum and associated cults surrounding the legendary cryptid. The Mothman was a local legend, half man, half moth, who stalked the night, foretelling death and destruction with his mere presence, as we saw with the real-life collapse of the Silver Bridge in 1967, which propelled the Mothman into the public eye. Interest in him would ebb and flow with time, but the legend was seen as too obscure by scientists to properly look into. But a major underground religious movement would begin long before the Great War that would become to be known as the Cult of the Mothman, whose members conducted rituals and constructed many shrines dedicated to him throughout Appalachia. They saw him as a god among men and worshipped the Mothman as a holy being, and was rewarded with a day's warning through a vision by Brother Charles of a forthcoming flood that would devastate the world. This This saved the cult, but some believe high ground was where they should shelter, while Charles, who received the vision from the wise purple-eyed Mothman, took a group into the Lucky Hole mine instead, which splintered the cult into two, as deep within the mine was a being known as the Interloper, who lured many of the members to worship it instead of the Mothman. The enlightened refused to see the Interloper as the true god and temporarily left Appalachia, leaving the dim ones behind to be eradicated. In the absence of the cult, Point Pleasant came under the control of raiders immediately following the Great War, but the responders soon cleared them out and established an outpost in the church to assist the surviving locals. But after the scorch swept through the area, the cult will return and occupy the town. Flatwoods is the most well-known location within this area that thrived off tourists who flocked to the town with the hopes of seeing the infamous Flatwoods monster, a hovering being kept afloat by small rockets with a large bulbous head and long, thin arms enclosed within a spacesuit, through which large purple eyes glowed. This creature inspired the sign over the town's entrance, home of the Green Monster, which is half true as this town appears to be a nexus for extraterrestrial activity and the Flatwoods monster is a Zetan alien. But many Zetans frequent the area for an unknown reason and they occasionally abduct residents, like the case of Colton Pickens, whose claims were dismissed by the police as crazy ramblings. The town would survive the Great War mostly unharmed and soon became a focus point for the responders who got permission to set up inside the church from his Reverend Delbert Winters as a base of operations, and they also established a recruitment station next door within the bar. Here the group taught the town's residents the basics of survival, like how to purify water and farm. Across the river is the Voltec Agricultural Research Center, which experimented with new crop mutations and fertilizers to give bigger crop yields. An attempt was made to reactivate the center again post-war by McFadden with help from the responders in a bid to stave off starvation. But McFadden was not properly equipped to reprogram the Mr. Farmhams himself and caused him to go rogue and attack anybody who enters the premises. And finally, there's the Knoa Nuka-Cola plant. This was a marketing research center that was focused primarily on the flavor preferences of the local populace, with all the company's popular flavors, Nuka-Cola Cherry, Black, and Quartz for example, being constantly up for review through sales statistics and taste trials. But the plant did dabble in beverage development, as this was the birthplace of Nuka Cranberry, which was only available in the Watoga area and is infamously rare, even more so than Quantum. The plant's secondary objective was testing new flavors for their appeal and giving feedback to research and development for requested changes. Post-war, the facility would be essential in the overseer's plan, as she wished to use it as a production point for the Scorched Plague inoculation. She wanted to distribute it through Nuka-Cola in what she dubbed Nuka-Cola Vaccinated, which was created from one of her Vault Dweller's blood, whose antibodies were isolated and reproduced to create a vaccination to mass inoculate the populace in a simple and painless way. To the north of the forest is the Toxic Valley, which got its name from the copious amounts of industrial waste that is scattered across the area. This left the valley heavily contaminated and covered in a sickly fine white powder and bodies of disgusting orangish yellow-brown water that flows through the barren wasteland devoid of vegetation. Only dead trees remain on the cragged and cracking land that is home to countless mutated creatures. The Toxic Valley is centered around the town of Grafton, which serves as the main economic and social hub pre-war. Grafton was dominated by Grafton Steel, which gained preferred war contractor status to bolster the war effort, but boosted their quotas in turn. So unsavory business practices were initiated to meet demand. Waste was dumped into the nearby river without treatment, shifts extended to 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, breaks limited, sick pay eliminated, and safety standards lowered. But at least Grafton Steel complied with the Wartime Workers Act, giving a 50% pay increase for the last 2 hours of a shift. But all of this resulted in a sharp rise of workplace accidents that caused 123 sicknesses, 12 dismemberments, and 31 fatalities in the first quarter of 2077 alone. Obviously, this made the workforce disgruntled, and strikes soon came, which were dealt with heavy-handedly by the company to maintain production quotas. But the final straw was when automation began to take jobs away from the townsfolk. This caused a massive uproar among the workforce, who began to sabotage the automated facilities, which eventually forced the plant to close down for repairs, which captured the attention of Sugar Grove, who looked into the town over suspicion of communist sympathizers trying to damage the war effort. More on that later though. Obviously, this had a massive effect on the town, which was now racked with intense social unrest as protesters marched through the streets demanding their jobs and safer working conditions. Yet while this was happening, part of the municipal government itself was being automated, with a mainframe being installed in the mayor's office that was meant to assist in running the town, but ended up taking over after society fell with his army of Mr. Handies. Post-war, the responders would have a minor presence in town by trading and assisting its residents. The crater is the Diehards Raider Group's new headquarters, which was built from the remnants of the crashed Valiant 1 space station. This space station had been the testbed for a Voltec-like experiment in 2070, where the station's astronauts were unwittingly put into stasis to be connected to AI Athena for observation. This was until the station's orbit began to decay from neglect following the Great War, and it would fall to Earth, where only the mission lead, Captain Degar, would survive. The Diehards were from Appalachia, originating like all other raiders in the Savage Divide as stranded tourists and residents who were trapped on the mountains during the brutal winter of 2077-78. This harsh experience hardened and toned the raiders into thieves and murderers who had zero qualms about killing others and stealing their supplies, just as long as they lived to see tomorrow. Well, that was except the Diehards, whose leader Vincent Freed believed that they did not have to kill innocents to get what they desired, which made them stand out from the other gangs who despised the group for their perceived weakness. However, the gang would be mostly wiped out by super mutants, with only a small group able to escape and travel as far as the capital and Commonwealth before returning, now under the command of Meg Groba, and seeking out the legendary treasure of unimaginable fortune hidden within Appalachia. And south of the forest is the Ash Heap, which got its name from the thick, choking black smoke and powdery soot that covers the area. This is thanks to the subterranean fires that rage across the region that are due to the main industry that West Virginia is known for, coal mining, which dominated the local economy and was spearheaded by the Garahan and Hornwright mining companies, who had a bitter rivalry with each other. The Hornwrights were heavily invested in automating their systems to future-proof the company, and so they created the auto miner in Rocktown to replace much of their workforce, while the Garahan Mining Co. sided with human workers. This company invested heavily in augmenting their workforce with cutting-edge equipment to make their work that much more safe and efficient, like the excavator suit of power armor, which set the stage between these two rivals, and a competition was held between the excavator suit of power armor and auto miner to see which was truly superior. Towering over this part of the barren wasteland is Mount Blair, which is a famous mining landmark that overlooks the entire region. This mountain is known for its rich coal deposits and labor disputes, with mining operations still ongoing up until the bombs dropped. The most prominent feature on this mountain is the massive Rockhound excavator, which was constructed by a Hornwright and could move 11,000 cubic meters of earth in an hour and had strip mined the mountain to a stubby hill over the years, all to feed the resource-hungry America. However, true to the nature of Blair Mountain, a dispute erupted between the miners and the Hornwright in late 2077 that resulted in a clash known as the Second Battle of Blair Mountain, during which the miners temporarily overtook the massive machine in mid-October, which prompted the state to send in the National Guard and stomp the rebellion out, mirroring the Battle of Blair Mountain in 1921, when the National Guard also broke a coal miners' strike. Most of the disgruntled workers came from the nearby town of Welch, located just southwest of Blair. The local economy had been ruined by automation, which had caused massive discontent among the now mostly unemployed population, but help soon be on the way when representatives from the automated mining service arrived in town with the promise of revitalizing the economy through the discovery of valuable ultrasite deposits. But after an earthquake damaged several homes, AMS began to evict people from their properties by claiming resource rights, which only caused more discontent and eventually led to the Second Battle of Blair Mountain and the storming of the town by the National Guard to put down the rioting. Sometime after the Great War, ultrasite pistols would begin to pierce through the ground, probably after more earthquakes ravaged the area that caused buildings to crumble, massive cracks to form across town. Also during this time, a segment of the Valiant 1 space station containing the other three astronauts would crash here after it broke apart during re-entry, with no survivors. Running down the entire map from north to south is the tallest peaks of the Appalachians, dubbed the Savage Divide. This region effectively splits Appalachia into two halves, as wastelanders often consider this spine of mountains to be too treacherous to cross, and for good reason. Sheer, near vertical cliffs and steep slopes that were infested by raiders made traveling across this region nearly impossible in the immediate post-war world. Yet pre-war, the area was known for its luxurious ski resorts and quaint bed and breakfasts that dotted the tall mountains here and gave it a near picturesque feel. The top of the world was a high-end ski resort lift station with shops and restaurants on the upper levels of the top-shaped structure that was designed for the ultra-wealthy. This is where the most prominent raider gangs of Appalachia would form, from the ultra-wealthy patrons who were stranded here after the war and survived the terrible nuclear winter of 2077-78 that hardened the survivors into raider gangs known as the Cutthroats, which was led by the aforementioned David and Rosalind Thorpe and was responsible for the Christmas flood that destroyed Charleston in 2082, which effectively killed what remained of the regional government for an act of petty revenge that inadvertently also drowned his very much still alive wife. The raiders mostly operated within the Savage Divide, harassing people who passed through the area, stealing their things and often killing them, which made the mountains that much more treacherous to cross. But the Cutthroats were not afraid to venture into the forest and attack settlements for their loot, often with deadly results when the spawners showed up and a firefight would break out. While farther south is Huntersville, a formerly a happy mountain town that by 2070s was slowly dying as residents moved away in droves for better opportunities. But in 2075, the US government offered an urban revitalization project and Huntersville happily accepted, receiving a new water recycling system and sewer lines 3 months later. And by August, West Tech had established a new research center just outside of town, creating a renewed sense of hope as the economy boomed with West Tech employees frequented the town, and especially when the company began paying for testing rights on local farms. However, the economic upturn went south after West Tech stopped doing business with Huntersville, and then townfolk began to fall ill with a mysterious virus. West Tech claimed it was a rare form of flu, which turned the skin green and made hair fall out, but the truth was much darker. The new water recycling system was intentionally contaminated with traces of FEV by West Tech, and by August 2076, the town was under lockdown by company security wearing hazmat suits, who were quickly followed by soldiers of the elite 12th Mountain Division to quarantine the residents under the pretext of protecting the populace. But the real reason was so West Tech scientists had a controlled environment for them to observe the virus's effects and conduct experiments on live subjects. The citizens quickly became feral as they mutated into soup mutants, with many throwing themselves at the soldiers in fits of rage or trying to slash at them with knives while the soldiers recovered specimens from the scientists. This project was considered so covert that the only facility at Sugar Grove was ordered to not observe the town on October 7th, just 2 weeks before the Great War. Post-war, Huntersville is the epicenter of the soup mutants who inhabit Appalachia, thanks to the water system still being affected by FEV. The town itself is in ruins after the soldiers fled in panic, leaving military equipment scattered everywhere and roads blocked with tanks and barricades. From here, the soup mutants would spread outwards, but would stay centered on the plagued town of monsters. The West Tech facility was also the birthplace of 2 cryptids that now inhabit Appalachia, which were created through experiments with FEV and people. But once the bombs fell, the lab would be breached, and these abominations of nature, known as the Grafton Monster and Snallygaster, would escape into the wilderness to terrorize the survivors of the apocalypse. Sugar Grove was an Office of Naval Intelligence station set up to honor the miners and workers of the region for seditious anti-American activities and Chinese operations. The station was home to the Signal Intelligence Division, with assistance provided by the Marine Corps, and was the United States Space Administration transmitter. The building is posed as another American military facility designed to support the war effort, but beneath this facade lies a black site that officially doesn't exist, of primarily monitoring capabilities, mostly focused on intercepting radio signals and tapping phone lines to both gather information on potential threats and act upon it. A perfect example of this was Edgar Arson, who was disappeared in 2075 after he attracted too much attention to himself through union work, which resulted in a warrant for his arrest being issued. But the worst was to come when agents, probably Marine personnel, retrieved him from the police and brought him to the facility, which made Sugar Grove double as a field office and interrogation facility to silence voices of opposition. Another important job this facility was tasked with was to research advanced surveillance techniques, which looked more like MK Ultra as drugs and hypnosis were experimented with to see if average people could be turned into sleeper agents for the Navy. The entire project saw no notable successes, however, despite the laundry list of side effects, including bodily harm, damage to the mind, and the accidental creation of at least one superhuman martial arts master. And lastly, Sugar Grove was actively investigating the many cryptid sightings across Appalachia and keeping detailed records about each creature, these being the previously mentioned Mothman and Flywood's monster, along with the Grafton Monster, Snallygaster, Sheep Squatch, and Wendigo. But Sugar Grove did have one area where it was banned from monitoring, that being the town of Huntersville, as this was an enclave project and was supposed to be secluded from the rest of the military. But this didn't sit well with the officers at Sugar Grove, whose job was to monitor everything in West Virginia and be the embodiment of Big Brother in the state, emphasized by by their motto, hear, see, be silent, and their symbol was a viper wrapped around the state as a quiet killer, so this blackout order was highly suspicious and went against everything Oni stood for. Vault 79 was a secret vault constructed by Vault Tech to house the United States gold repository to be the basis to rebuild the economy post-war. It was staffed by Secret Service and Army personnel who were ordered to treat any unauthorized people found on the premises as hostile and to shoot to kill. The number 79 was chosen in reference to the atomic number of gold as a small Easter egg and hint towards the vault's intended purpose. No expense was spared in the construction of this vault though, and secrecy was of the utmost importance for security reasons. Land was acquired from local farmers by the federal government by claiming it had been contaminated with radiation, and large sums were paid out as compensation, and different companies were used to supply materials than those of other West Virginia vaults to hide the location's intention. The stated dweller capacity was 120, composed mostly of guards, but some security breaches would be sustained, especially when a group of soldiers stole millions in the summer of 2072 and fled to Las Vegas to gamble, resulting in a shootout at the Ultralex Casino and cross-state manhunt for Sergeant Catherine Shanghai Sally Montgomery when she fled Vegas and escaped to Texas, where she stole a speedboat and attempted to flee but was killed by the USS Wade. After this incident, security at Vault 79 was increased, with a special model of power armor known as the T-65 being constructed specifically for the Secret Service's unique needs. This was a hybrid between the T-45 and T-51 families, and you can learn more about it in this video here. Sometime in the intervening years after the Great War, a Secret Service agent known as Shorty would lead a mutiny that killed most of the occupants, leaving only a small number of Secret Service agents left in the vault by the time the vault dwellers breached the facility in 2103 while searching for the gold. The White Spring Resort is the last important location in the Divide and was a luxurious resort for high-class members of society, which got its name from the natural sulfur spring nearby, the White Spring. The building is a massive colonial-style mansion that had plenty of amenities for its upper-class guests, like the surrounding extensive golf course, shops, dining, and recreational facilities. However, the resort was suffering financially and had sold off half its lands to keep operational and to finance the renovation project codenamed the 2080 Initiative to draw in customers. Most of this land went to the real estate development, but only 5 plots had been sold by the time the bombs fell, which was disastrous for future plans and threatened to ruin the 2080 Initiative. But post-war, the responders would set up shop inside the building and use the Nuka-Cola promotional event here as inspiration to use bottle caps as currency. However, hidden deep under the resort's grounds was a secret nuclear fallout shelter known as the White Spring Bunker, which was built for Congress to ensure the continuity of American government in the event of a nuclear war. However, the bunker was hijacked by the Enclave for its own purposes even before construction began, with the project being financed by embezzled Department of Agriculture funds under the direction of the department's head and Enclave member, Secretary Thomas Eckhart. The financial discrepancies would be discovered by West Virginia Senator Sam Blackwell, but the senator was unable to blow the lid on the whole thing before he was forced into hiding, which is something we'll touch on in a bit. The bunker was staffed entirely by robotic servants and was equipped with a vast array of advanced assets to assist in daily operations. Most notably is its custom-built ZAC supercomputer, Modus, as the heart and brain of the complex to run and maintain its daily operations for the planned 200 dwellers. SOTUS, an offsite support AI located at the Resource Center, and the Kovac Muldoon platform, which was located in geosynchronous orbit over West Virginia and acted as the Enclave's eyes in the sky to support surface operations by providing constant surveillance on the world above ground, could launch missile strikes, and drop supply pods from orbit. On the day of the Great War, most of Congress would evacuate to the White Springs bunker for safety, but non-Enclave members were rounded up and executed as soon as the doors closed so the Enclave's operations could begin. However, communications with other Enclave facilities like Raven Rock and Control Station Enclave were lost during the nuclear exchange, which left White Springs isolated. Secretary Eckhart would soon be declared president of his little enclave after the suspicious death of the Secretary of Treasury left him as next in the line of succession, and he would go on an immediate war footing with the goal of limiting communism once and for all by using any means, including but not limited to a second nuclear strike. But first he purged his ranks of opposition by stealing those that did not transport him inside a conference room to be suffocated, leaving this detachment with only 48 members, among them a single general to access the Appalachian automated nuclear network and authorize the strike, which was soon bolstered by the arrival of a National Guard unit led by Colonel Ellen Santiago. But having a general alone was not enough to launch a follow-up strike because the automated system required the DEFCON status to be at its highest level of 1 as a safeguard against unauthorized use. So the Enclave went to work attempting to trick the nuclear silos into believing that West Virginia was under attack. First, they're releasing FEV mutated super mutants into the environment, then Liberator bots from Mama Dolces. But when neither of these proved satisfactory, they turned to creating the first Scorched Beasts by exposing irradiated bats to a select biochemical process that heavily mutated them. Although everyone wanted to win the war once and for all, newly promoted General Santiago felt disgusted with having to put Appalachia through hell to launch the nukes, and quickly began to regret her decision of supporting the Enclave. Eckhart would place her in a medically induced coma until he could complete his objectives, but Santiago's men would rescue her in an attempt to escape the White Springs bunker, damaging Modus in the process during the brief civil war, which resulted in Modus sealing the doors and flooding the complex with toxic gas, destroying this wing of the Enclave in 2086. Many years later though, in 2104, the White Springs Resort would be the epicenter of the Responders' revival, known as the White Springs Refuge, with support from the mysterious management represented by the secretive Orlando. Nestled within the lowlands on the eastern side of the Savage Divide is the Mire, a vast flooded swampland that is overgrown with vines, tall grasses, and towering trees, perfect for lurking predators to hide in and ambush unsuspecting prey. This is truly a wild area that is rapidly being reclaimed by nature, that is nearly consumed by wildly mutated vines that have wrapped themselves around anything they can find like predators in their own right, making any man-made structure here quickly fall into ruin as the vines invade. The most well-known location within the Mire is the infamous town of Harper's Ferry, which is where the abolitionist John Brown was killed after attempting to raid the armory in 1859, and some say was the first battle of the Civil War. In the years before the Great War, Harper's Ferry was a bustling small town popular with tourists who frequented the area, but as the war neared, many doomsday preppers known as the Free Staters were distrusting of the government and would construct their own fallout shelters in the surrounding mountains and use the town as a supply location to buy what they needed. This disrupted the tourist-based economy, as the Free States scared tourists away with their seemingly unhinged conspiracy theories of the end of days and a secret shadow government controlling America, both of which turned out to be true though. But the town's residents were getting sick of the Free Staters driving off their customers, so by 2077, with the war escalating again in China, tensions in this town reached a boiling point and violent brawls would break out in the streets between Free Staters and business owners. This caught the eye of the government, who started a propaganda campaign in the town and coerced business owners to turn over the names and addresses of Free Staters who bought from their stores, all under the pretense of the organization conducting seditious activities, which gave them the government pretext to seize their property. But post-war, the town would be flooded with refugees and would struggle to find its footing in the coming years. Vault 94 would open its doors just 1 year after the bombs fell and sent ambassadors out into the wasteland to invite survivors back into the vault. But the people of Harper's Ferry were mistrusting of Vault 94's intentions, and when their group entered the vault, a skirmish would ensue that resulted in the vault's destruction when the Gek was destroyed, causing a massive nuclear explosion which spewed thick, mutagenic fog out into the surrounding swamp that rapidly mutated anything organic here. In 2079, the Free Staters emerged from their hidden bunkers around Harper's Ferry. This group succeeded from America just prior to the Great War after their prominent member, Senator Sam Blackwell, was forced into hiding to escape the Enclave after his accusations about Secretary of Agriculture Eckhart's connection to the Saudi government gathered too much attention, and the Enclave's ire was firmly placed onto Blackwell and his family. Once out of their shelters though, the Free States and Harper's Ferry would set aside any differences the two groups had and help one another to rebuild. But in 2096, the Scorch would reach Harper's Ferry, and the Free Staters would abandon the town and retreat back into the bunkers after the outer fortifications were breached, leaving the townsfolk to be consumed by the plague. But this would only prolong their survival for so long, as by 2102 the entire faction had been wiped out. Camp Venture was a survival training camp that was known as the Virginia's Endurance and Survival Training pre-war, which taught advanced survival classes over a 4-week period to its students. But after the bombs fell, this is where the West Virginia Brotherhood of Steel chapter was founded after Elizabeth Taggarty's Army Ranger Team Thunder, sheltered here during the brutal winter of 2077-78, would later serve as the Brotherhood of Steel's main main training and recruitment facility in the area until 2093, when the camp was abandoned and operations moved to Fort Defiance. The Brotherhood's main motive was preservation of technology deemed too dangerous for mere man. This was to protect against a second Great War, or perversion of science like what the group's founder Roger Maxson experienced in California right before his desertion. Human experimentation of FEV using military prisoners, very similar to Huntersville. The Appalachian chapter was formed after Maxson reached out to all surviving military units across America with a message of hope to rejoin him, and it just so happened to be that Taggarty was an old acquaintance of Maxson and was intrigued by his ideas after the breakdown in command. So the Ranger organized a chapter around herself as head paladin and began to recruit former military personnel into her ranks, but civilians were eventually allowed to join as well. The organization allied itself with the Responders and fought side by side with them against the super mutants in the Battle of Huntersville. The other notable Brotherhood location in this region was Thunder Mountain Power Station. This was a nuclear power plant that had been automated much like Appalachia pre-war, and as such was still happily chugging along, generating electricity by the time the BOS conquered it from the Free States, and it rapidly became their most valuable asset and eventual graveyard when in August 2095, the chapter made its final stand here against the Scorched. Cranberry Bog is the southeasternmost region of Appalachia and got its name pre-war thanks to the colorful red flora decorating the area, mostly cranberries, but carnivorous pitcher plants and sundew plants were also found here in droves across untouched fields. Fort Defiance was the Brotherhood's headquarters after abandoning Camp Venture in 2093 and served as their primary base of operations during their consolidation. The location was chosen thanks to its hardwired connection to the power plant via landlines, which allowed remote communication. Before the war, it was a mental institute created in the 1800s known as the Allegheny Asylum, and by the 2050s, it was massively overcrowded at nearly 10 times its design capacity, which created horrible conditions for both the patients and staff alike. Patients were routinely abused by his staff in the name of healing and treated as nothing more than cash cows when their atrocities were exposed by Eleanor Tarkin of the Charleston Herald, forced the asylum to close in 2060, but having the unintended side effect of making most of the patients here homeless. The grounds would be turned into a park with security guards on patrol 24/7 to help maintain the area and remove any of the former patients trying to squat here. Post-war, the building would be occupied by survivors of Watauga for the winter, but they would abandon it in 2078 after they were attacked by raiders, leaving the rotting building to the elements for a few years until the Brotherhood moved in during the early 2080s after capturing Thunder Mountain. It would be here that the first documented sighting of a scorched beast would be recorded, but ignored for the time being to the detriment of Appalachia. Defiance would serve as the Brotherhood's headquarters for the next few years, but as the scorched grew in numbers, the chapter had to resort to even harsher measures, eventually leading to the abandonment of all other structures except the Thunder Mountain, and Defiance in the few months before the unsuccessful Operation Touchdown in January 2094 that bled much of the Brotherhood's strength. By August, the fort was on the front lines and finally fell on the 18th with all hands lost. Watauga was first established in 2042 as the City of Tomorrow, but it wasn't until the 2070s when the town truly took form, thanks to a joint effort between Robco, Automated Mining Services, and the state government, which Governor Evans championed. Envisioned as a completely automated town, all public services were controlled by robots, including a custodial and security force. However, this massive project had dire consequences for both the residents of Watauga and the environment. First of all, with the massive overhaul of infrastructure in the 2070s, property prices quickly skyrocketed to unreasonable levels, which made it nearly impossible for longtime residents to afford continuing living in their homes. This had the additional effect of bumping the price for basic goods up as store owners tried to compensate for the tax hikes, while also increasing the unemployment rate as jobs were taken over by automation, which drove many residents away only to be replaced by the rich, creating an elitist atmosphere in the corporate town whose residents had to be individually approved by Robco itself to prevent the wrong type of people from living there, on top of other crony elitist practices like refusing any expansion to the bus lines and limiting emergency fire services to the major districts. Additionally, AMS had been conducting experiments in the area that greatly contaminated the environment, but refused to clean up after themselves. These included detonating multiple nuclear weapons underground to create ultracite, which left much of the remaining groundwater and soil highly contaminated, leaving the burden on the town and local industry. All this inspired a disgruntled resident to form the Free Watauga People's Party, which launched a sabotage campaign against the city's robotic servants a day before the bombs dropped, resulting in the crazed robots that slaughtered the town's residents and continue to roam the streets, attacking anyone who enters. So that's only some of the most interesting locations and factions within each region of the map that make 76 such an interesting setting and world. How the acts of one man drunk with power and thirsting for revenge exterminated humanity in the region when nukes couldn't even do that, only for the horrors unleashed here to be beaten back by a handful of Vault dwellers and made it safe for the rumors of unimaginable riches to inject life back into the seemingly untouched landscape. These are some of the hundreds of stories to be told, so get out there and explore post-apocalyptic West Virginia yourself, Pioneer. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like, subscribe, and comment, and I will see you next time.